The invasion begins. The colony world of Nova Eden shimmered like a jewel against the vast backdrop of space. Lush forests covered much of its surface, broken only by the sparkling blue of its oceans and the gleaming spires of its cities. For the past 50 years, Nova Eden had been humanity's most successful extrasolar colony, a testament to human perseverance and ingenuity. In the capital city of New Hope, Dr. Elara Chen stood on the balcony of her apartment, gazing out at the bustling metropolis. The early morning sun cast a golden glow over the city's sleek buildings and verdant parks. As the lead xenobiologist at the Nova Eden Research Center, Elara had dedicated her life to studying the unique flora and fauna of this alien world. Today, however, her mind was occupied with more personal matters. Her daughter Zoe was starting her first day as an intern at the research center. At just 18, Zoe was already showing promise as a brilliant young scientist, following in her mother's footsteps. Elara couldn't help but feel a mixture of pride and anxiety as she thought about her daughter's future. "Mom, are you ready?" Zoe's excited voice called from inside the apartment. Elara smiled, pushing her worries aside. "Coming, sweetie." As they made their way to the research center, neither of them could have imagined that this ordinary day would mark the beginning of an extraordinary and terrifying chapter in human history. High above Nova Eden, hidden from the colony's early warning systems, a massive alien vessel silently approached. Inside, Supreme Commander Sarloff of the Taraxian Empire surveyed the unsuspecting planet with cold, calculating eyes. "Status report," Sarloff demanded, his voice a low growl that sent shivers down the spines of his subordinates. A junior officer stepped forward, bowing low. "My lord, our cloaking technology continues to function perfectly. The humans remain unaware of our presence." Sarloff nodded, his scaled skin glinting in the dim light of the bridge. "Excellent. Prepare the dropships. We will begin the first phase of our invasion immediately." The Taraxians were a warrior race, driven by an insatiable hunger for conquest. They had spent centuries perfecting their art of war, and now they had set their sights on the resource-rich worlds of humanity. Nova Eden, with its abundant natural resources and relatively small population, was the perfect starting point for their galactic domination. As Elara and Zoe arrived at the research center, alarms suddenly blared to life. The sound pierced the air, shattering the peace of the morning. Confused and frightened faces turned skyward as dark shapes began to descend from the clouds. "Mom, what's happening?" Zoe asked, her voice trembling. Elara grabbed her daughter's hand, her scientific curiosity warring with her instinct for self-preservation. "I don't know, but we need to get inside. Now." All across New Hope, scenes of panic unfolded as the Taraxian dropships landed. Heavily armed soldiers poured out, their armor gleaming and their weapons primed. The local security forces, caught completely off guard, scrambled to mount a defense. In the heart of the city, retired Colonel Marcus Steele watched the chaos unfold from his apartment window. His battle-hardened instincts kicked in immediately, and he reached for the secure comm unit he had kept as a memento of his military days. "This is Colonel Steele to any remaining UNDF forces," he barked into the device, using the old United Nations Defense Force frequency. "We are under attack by unknown hostiles. Rally at the Central Plaza. Prepare for urban warfare." Across the city, a handful of retired soldiers and reservists received his message. They were few in number, but each was a veteran of humanity's earlier conflicts. They knew the odds were against them, but they also knew they couldn't stand by and watch their home fall without a fight. At the research center, Elara and Zoe huddled with a group of scientists and staff in a secure lab. Through the reinforced windows, they could see the alien invaders advancing methodically through the streets. "They're not just destroying everything," Elara murmured, her analytical mind racing. "They're cataloging, taking samples." Zoe looked at her mother, fear and curiosity warring in her eyes. "Why? What do they want?" Before Elara could respond, the lab door burst open. A group of security guards rushed in, led by a grim-faced woman Elara recognized as Captain Sarah Hawkins. "We need to evacuate immediately," Hawkins announced. "We have reports that the aliens are capturing civilians. We can't let them get their hands on our top scientists." As they prepared to leave, a deafening explosion rocked the building. Dust and debris rained down as part of the ceiling collapsed. In the chaos that followed, Elara lost sight of Zoe. "Zoe," she screamed, frantically searching through the smoke and confusion. "Zoe, where are you?" But her daughter was nowhere to be seen. As the security team urged the remaining survivors to follow them to safety, Elara stood rooted to the spot, torn between the instinct to search for her child and the knowledge that staying would likely mean capture or death. Captain Hawkins gripped her arm. "Dr. Chen, we have to go. Now. We'll find your daughter, I promise, but we can't help her if we're captured ourselves." With a heavy heart, Elara allowed herself to be led away, silently vowing to move heaven and earth to find Zoe. Outside, the battle for Nova Eden raged on. The Terraxian forces, with their superior technology and numbers, were quickly overwhelming the colony's defenses, yet pockets of resistance were forming, led by veterans like Colonel Steele and fueled by the desperate courage of those fighting for their homes and families. As the first day of the invasion drew to a close, the fate of Nova Eden hung in the balance. The Terraxians had achieved surprise and gained significant ground, but they had yet to face the full extent of human determination and ingenuity. In the smoking ruins of New Hope, as survivors regrouped and the invaders consolidated their gains, one thing became clear. This was only the beginning of a conflict that would test humanity's resolve like never before. The people of Nova Eden would have to dig deep, drawing on reserves of courage and resourcefulness they never knew they possessed. For Elara, the path forward was clear. She would use every ounce of her scientific knowledge and every connection she had to find her daughter and strike back at the invaders. For Colonel Steele and the other veterans, this was a call back to arms, a chance to defend not just a colony, but the future of humanity itself. As night fell on Nova Eden, the stars above seemed to shine with a cold, indifferent light. But in the hearts of the colonists, a fire had been lit, a fire of resistance that would not easily be extinguished. The invasion had begun, but humanity's stand against the Terraxian threat was just taking shape. In the days to come, the true test of human resilience would unfold, with the fate of not just Nova Eden, but potentially all of humanity hanging in the balance. A father's grief turns to rage. As dawn broke over the ravaged landscape of Nova Eden, the full extent of the Terraxian invasion became clear. Smoke rose from the ruined buildings of New Hope, and the streets were eerily quiet, save for the occasional sound of alien craft passing overhead. In a makeshift command center hidden beneath the ruins of the old city hall, Colonel Marcus Steele surveyed a group of haggard survivors. Among them was Dr. Elara Chen, her eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night of worry and planning. "Status report," Steele barked, his voice gravelly from inhaling smoke and shouting orders. Captain Sarah Hawkins stepped forward, her uniform torn and dirty. "Sir, we've managed to establish contact with several resistance cells across the city. The aliens, the Terraxians, as they call themselves, have set up processing centers. They're rounding up civilians." Elara's heart clenched. "Any word on the people taken from the research center?" Hawkins shook her head. "Nothing concrete, but we've heard rumors of a large group being transported to a facility in the mountains." Steele's eyes narrowed. "The old mining complex. It makes sense. Defensible position, easy to convert for their purposes." He turned to Elara. "Doctor, what can you tell us about these Terraxians? Anything that might give us an edge?" Elara took a deep breath, forcing herself to think like a scientist despite her personal anguish. "From what we've observed, they're reptilian in nature. Their technology is advanced, but it seems to have a biological component. I believe their ships and even their weapons are partially organic." Weaknesses, Steele pressed. It's hard to say without more data, but Ilara paused, her mind racing. Their reliance on organic tech might make them vulnerable to certain types of biological or chemical agents. If we could get samples, I might be able to synthesize something. Steele nodded grimly. It's a start. Hawkins, I want reconnaissance teams sent out. Priority is gathering intel and rescuing civilians where possible, and I want a team prepped for a covert mission to that mountain facility. As the others moved to carry out their orders, Ilara approached Steele. Colonel, I want to be on that mountain team. My daughter is one of many missing. Doctor, Steele cut her off, but his tone was gentle. I understand your pain, but we need you here. Your expertise could be the key to defeating these bastards. Ilara was about to argue when alarms blared throughout the command center. A young technician called out, Sir, we're picking up a transmission. It's being broadcast across all frequencies. The screens around the room flickered to life, revealing the alien visage of Supreme Commander Tsarloff. His scaled face filled the frame, yellow eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. People of Nova Eden, the alien's voice boomed, translated through some unseen technology. Your world now belongs to the Terraxian Empire. Resistance is futile and will be met with severe punishment. Surrender yourselves at the designated processing centers. Those who cooperate will be treated fairly. Those who resist. The alien's mouth curved into what might have been a smile, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Well, we always need test subjects. The transmission cut off, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. Steele was the first to recover. Well, folks, I think we just got our marching orders. We resist with everything we've got. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Ilara felt a steely resolve settle over her. She would find Zoe, and she would make these aliens pay for every moment of suffering they had inflicted. As the resistance began to organize in earnest, none of them could have predicted the series of events that would unfold, events that would not only shape the fate of Nova Eden, but potentially alter the course of human history. Part 3. Preparation and First Strike. The next few days were a blur of activity as the resistance worked tirelessly to gather resources, rescue civilians, and formulate a plan of attack. Ilara threw herself into her work, analyzing every scrap of data they could gather on the Terraxians. One evening, as she pored over some tissue samples retrieved by a scouting party, she made a breakthrough. Colonel Steele, she called out, her voice echoing through the makeshift lab. I think I found something. Steele hurried over, followed closely by Captain Hawkins. What is it, Doctor? Ilara pointed to her microscope. Look at the cellular structure of their organic tech. It's incredibly adaptive, which explains their rapid healing and the resilience of their equipment. But it also means they're hypersensitive to certain stimuli. Hawkins leaned in, intrigued. What kind of stimuli? Specific electromagnetic frequencies, Ilara explained, her excitement building. If we could generate a powerful enough EM pulse at just the right frequency, we could potentially disable their tech, maybe even incapacitate the Terraxians themselves. Steele's eyes lit up with the first glimmer of hope they'd seen in days. Can you build something to generate this pulse? Ilara nodded. With the right parts, yes. But we'd need to get close to one of their major installations for it to be effective. The mountain facility, Hawkins said, realization dawning. If that's where they're processing prisoners, it's likely to be a major hub. Steele nodded, a plan already forming in his mind. All right, people, we've got our target. Now let's figure out how to hit it. Over the next week, the resistance worked feverishly to prepare for their first major strike against the Terraxians. Ilara and a team of engineers cobbled together an EM pulse device using salvaged parts and equipment from the research center. Meanwhile, Steele and Hawkins trained a strike team, drilling them relentlessly on the plan of attack. The night before the mission, Ilara sat alone in the lab, making final adjustments to the pulse device. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked, exhaustion and worry taking their toll. You should rest, a voice said from behind her. She turned to see Colonel Steele standing in the doorway, looking as tired as she felt. Ilara shook her head. I can't. Not until we find her, Steele finished. He stepped into the room, his expression softening. I know, Ilara. I've been there. For the first time, Ilara noticed the worn wedding band on Steele's finger. You have a family. A shadow passed over Steele's face. Had. Lost them in the Centauri conflict years ago. It's why I retired here. Thought I could leave the fighting behind. Ilara felt a surge of empathy for the gruff old soldier. I'm sorry. Steele waved away her sympathy. Ancient history, but it's why I understand what you're going through. And why I know you're not going to listen when I tell you to stay behind tomorrow. Ilara straightened, ready to argue, but Steele held up a hand. I'm not going to stop you, but I need you to promise me something. The mission comes first. We hit them with that pulse, gather what intel we can, and get out. No heroics, no solo rescue attempts. Clear. Ilara nodded, grateful for his understanding. Clear, Colonel, and thank you. As Steele turned to leave, he paused at the door. Get some rest, Doctor. Tomorrow we take the fight to them. The next morning, under cover of a heavy fog that had rolled in from the nearby ocean, the strike team made their way towards the mountain facility. They moved silently through the dense forest, their path cleared by resistance scouts who had spent days mapping out Terraxian patrol routes. As they neared the facility, Ilara felt her heart racing. The massive structure loomed before them, a twisted amalgamation of alien architecture and the repurposed human mining equipment. Terraxian guards patrolled the perimeter, their scaled forms moving with fluid grace. Steele raised a hand, signaling the team to halt. He turned to Ilara, his voice a low whisper. We're in position. How close do you need to be? Ilara consulted the readout on her device. Another 100 meters, ideally. Any further and we risk the pulse being too weak. Steele nodded grimly. All right, people. This is it. Hawkins, take your team and create a diversion on the east side. We'll use the chaos to get Ilara and the device into position. The plan unfolded with precision. Hawkins and her team launched a series of small explosives, drawing the attention of the Terraxian guards. In the ensuing confusion, Steele led Ilara and a small group towards their target point. As they reached the optimal location, Ilara began to set up the device. Her hands moved swiftly, years of scientific training kicking in despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. How long? Steele asked, his eyes scanning their surroundings warily. Just a few more seconds, Ilara replied, making the final connections. There. She pressed the activation switch, and for a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, a high-pitched whine filled the air, building in intensity until it was almost painful. Suddenly, the Terraxian guards began to convulse, dropping their weapons and clutching their heads. The organic components of their armor writhed and pulsated, as if in agony. It's working, Ilara exclaimed, a mix of elation and horror in her voice. Steele was already moving. Strike team, move in. Secure the entrance and find those prisoners. As the resistance fighters surged forward, taking advantage of the incapacitated Terraxians, Ilara felt a glimmer of hope. They had struck their first real blow against the invaders. But as she watched the aliens writhing in pain, a small part of her wondered at the cost of victory in this new and terrible war. Part 4. Escalation and Revelation. The success of the raid on the mountain facility marked a turning point in the Resistance's fight against the Terraxians. Over the next few weeks, similar strikes were carried out across Nova Eden, using Ilara's EM pulse technology to disable alien strongholds and rescue prisoners. But with each victory, the Terraxians' tactics grew more brutal. They began using human shields, making it harder for the Resistance to strike without civilian casualties. Reports came in of entire settlements being wiped out in retaliation for Resistance activities. In the command center, Now relocated to an abandoned mining tunnel for better security, Steele and his officers pored over the latest intelligence reports. "They're adapting," Hawkins said, frustration evident in her voice. "Our EM pulses are becoming less effective. They're developing some kind of shielding." Steele nodded grimly. "And they're hitting us harder than ever. We need a new strategy." Ilara, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. "What we need is to understand why they're here. This level of dedication, the resources they're pouring into this invasion, there has to be a reason beyond simple conquest." "Agree," Steele said. "But how do we find out? It's not like we can just ask them." A young resistance fighter cleared his throat nervously. "Actually, sir, we might be able to do just that." All eyes turned to the young man, who Ilara recognized as one of the technicians who had been working on decrypting Taraxian communications. "Explain," Steele demanded. The technician, whose name was Alex, stepped forward. "We've managed to isolate the frequency they use for long-range communications. With Dr. Chen's help, I think we could piggyback on their signal, maybe even establish two-way communication." Ilara's mind raced with the possibilities. If we could do that, we might be able to intercept crucial intelligence, maybe even feed them false information. Steele considered for a moment, then nodded. "Do it, but be careful. We can't risk giving away our position." Over the next few days, Ilara worked closely with Alex and his team to modify their communication equipment. It was delicate work, requiring a deep understanding of both human and Taraxian technology. Finally, after several failed attempts and near misses with Taraxian patrols, they managed to establish a stable connection. The resistance gathered around the makeshift communication array, tension thick in the air. "We're patched into their network," Alex announced. "But it's encrypted. It could take hours to." He was cut off as the speakers suddenly crackled to life, filling the room with an alien voice speaking in perfect, if oddly accented, English. "Must accelerate the extraction process. The High Command grows impatient. If we cannot secure the artifact soon, all of this will have been for nothing." Ilara and Steele exchanged shocked glances. "Artifact." Ilara mouthed silently. The alien voice continued. "The humans' resistance is stronger than anticipated. Perhaps if they understood the true importance of our mission, they would not fight so hard." A second voice, harsher and more authoritative, responded, "Fool. The humans cannot be allowed to know. If they were to discover the power hidden beneath their colony, they would destroy us all in their ignorance." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. "Well," Steele said after a moment, "I think we just got our answer about why they're here." Ilara's mind was racing. An artifact, hidden beneath the colony, but that's impossible. We've done extensive geological surveys. We would have found anything unusual. Hawkins shook her head. "Unless it was deliberately hidden. Remember, Nova Eden was terraformed before colonization. What if whoever did the terraforming knew about this, whatever it is? And now the Taraxians are after it," Steele concluded, "which means we need to find it first." The revelation spurred the resistance into a frenzy of activity. Teams were dispatched to scour the colony's historical records, looking for any hint of unusual findings during the initial terraforming process. Others began discreet scans of the planet's subsurface, searching for anything out of the ordinary. Ilara threw herself into the research, driven by a mix of scientific curiosity and the hope that understanding the Taraxians' true goal might somehow lead her to Zoe. Days blurred into weeks as they searched, all while continuing to fight a guerrilla war against the increasingly aggressive alien forces. It was Ilara who finally made the breakthrough. Poring over old terraforming logs, she noticed a pattern of anomalous energy readings that had been dismissed as equipment malfunctions. But when she overlaid these readings with her current geological scans, a clear picture emerged. "Colonel Steele," she called out, her voice echoing through the command center. "I think I found it." As the resistance leaders gathered around, Ilara explained her discovery. There's a massive energy source deep beneath the planet's surface, directly under the capital city. It's been there all along, but our instruments weren't calibrated to detect it properly. Steele studied the data, his expression grim. So this is what they're after. Any idea what it actually is? Ilara shook her head. I have theories, but nothing concrete. Whatever it is, it's incredibly powerful and unlike anything in our scientific records. Which means it's probably incredibly dangerous, Hawkins added. Steele nodded. Agreed. We need to secure this artifact before the Tyraxians can get their hands on it. Doctor, how soon can you pinpoint its exact location? Give me a day to refine these scans, and I should be able to give you a precise target, Ilara replied. Good, because I have a feeling we're running out of time. As if to underscore Steele's words, alarms began blaring throughout the command center. A resistance fighter burst in, his face pale with fear. Sir, the Tyraxians. They're launching a full-scale assault on the capital. It looks like they're going after the artifact. Steele's face hardened with resolve. Then we move now. Get everyone ready. This is going to be our last stand. As the resistance mobilized for what they knew would be their most crucial and dangerous mission yet, Ilara felt a strange mix of fear and anticipation. Whatever this artifact was, it had the power to change the course of the war, and possibly the fate of humanity itself. Part 5. Humanity's Stand and Resolution. The battle for Nova Eden's capital raged with an intensity that dwarfed all previous conflicts. Tyraxian forces poured into the city, their advanced weaponry laying waste to entire blocks as they drove towards their ultimate goal. But the human resistance, armed with the knowledge of what was truly at stake, fought with unprecedented ferocity. Colonel Steele led the main assault force,